Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at onebaseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We're here to preview the SEC tournament, the Highway to Hoover. We have taken the off-ramp on the Highway to Hoover, and we are here. I'm actually coming to you live from Hoover, Alabama. Mark will join me here tomorrow. Looking forward to a week of baseball here. Let's first of all, rules, I guess. I don't know. Mark and I are going to go logistic stuff, I guess. Mark and I are going to go through the field. We're going to preview tomorrow, Tuesday's games, take a look at what the matchups could mean for Wednesday, and then talk about the teams that got the double bye. I'll be monitoring the comments. What we won't do a ton of, just as an FYI, because Mark and Aaron and Kendall put out a Nerdcast that still is fresh and nothing has changed. The questions of what does my team have to do? How many more wins does it take for my team to do X or Y? Like, we probably won't bother with any of that, just because I will direct you to the Nerdcast. Because they did a much better job than we will do here off the cuff of getting into all that. So regardless, let's start here, Mark. New format, single elimination, 9 through 16 starting Tuesday. Winners go on to play 5 through 8, single elimination all the way through. Then the top 4 seeds join the day after that. Just generally speaking, what do you think the new format is going to do for what's going to be different about the tournament because of the format change in your mind?
Well, every league is different, and certainly this conference. I just did a story where I went in and looked at what's at stake for each team. And as you go through that, there's not a whole lot at stake for a lot of these teams. There are a few who can play their way into hosting. Kentucky can maybe solidify themselves so they aren't considered a bubble team, although I think they're going to get in anyway. But still, they could eliminate any doubt. A&M, South Carolina, Missouri. Those are the 3 teams who have to win it to get in, or at least A&M. They've got to win several games before we're even putting them on the bubble. So there's not a whole lot to gain. The other thing I would consider, though, is because of the different format, your top teams, your top 4, they don't show up till the end of the week. So at that point, what do you do with your pitching? There's certainly not a reason to bring guys back and use them for a 90-pitch outing or something like that, because you really want to target next week. So that'll be fascinating to see. Do you try maybe like a Cade Anderson? Do you run him out there for 40 pitches and then try to find someone who can help you next week, and maybe use a bunch of guys and see if you can find the right thing? Same thing with Arkansas, same thing with Texas. Those kinds of teams, I don't know I don't know how they can help themselves other than by finding pieces that can help you next week. Now, the other teams that we're looking at, the Tennessees, the Alabama, the Ole Miss, if Florida, for example, if they were to get hot and make it to the weekend, make it to Saturday, then perhaps they can host. So there is something to play for there. How will they use their pitching? You got to be smart, because you don't want to mess up next week, but there is something to play for. There are some stakes where you can improve your status, and I think that's going to be fascinating on the field. I think from a big picture standpoint, this format probably fits where the SEC is, because you're not getting into one of these grinded out, hey, playing 5 games in 5 days, that kind of thing, unless you really need to continue your season. Okay. And so I think that part is going to be interesting, just to see how it's different, but that works. But the flip side of that is, because there's less stakes, because you're guaranteed 1 game, what's the attendance going to be like? Certainly this has been a great atmosphere in Hoover for, ever since I've been coming. It's been it's been a great scene. Does this affect it at all? Or is just, it just means more, they're going to show up anyway, and fans are going to come? So that's to be determined. And maybe 1 year isn't a big enough sample size. We'll need to see how the different teams are in different positions to really make that judgment. But it is something that we're going to monitor.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing is that you hit on it. Is the phrase I've been using is you're a lot less likely to get trapped in Hoover, for 4 or 5 days and get nothing out of it.
Right.
Go 2-2, like congratulations, you just spent a week in Hoover. So that is off the table. So I do think it'll allow teams a little more leash, especially those top ranked teams, a little more leash to just kind of just treat it like a regular series. We're gonna throw Friday, Saturday, Sunday guys on. I guess it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and hey, if we get to Sunday, great, we'll deal with that then. But even that, at least you're playing for a trophy. So it does kind of open up, I think, teams to be able to feel that way. All right, let's get into the actual field. So the way we're going to do this, and we're going to be pretty brief about it tonight, but we're going to go over the Tuesday matchups, and then we'll kind of talk about potential matchups in that second round, and then kind of maybe just touch on the top 4 seeds, because ultimately we're not going to see those teams for a little while. So
sure.
And also in the comments, Jeremy Scott says this year will make 22 years he's gone to the SEC baseball tournament. So
nice,
Jeremy. That's quite a run. Well done. I saw a lot of, as I pulled into the hotel here tonight, a lot of LSU cars and Bama cars and Auburn cars, and so even some of the folks that are playing till later this week have already started showing up, which is cool. So
love it.
All right. Game 1, Mark, Missouri, Alabama. I think this actually, this series got this game got a lot more interesting when Missouri decided to do what it did with its pitching.
Yeah.
And so they start Sam Horn. They've also got Will Libbert ready to go. I wouldn't be shocked if you see Tony Newbeck come back.
Yep.
Ian Losey is probably on the menu. So, I mean, those are their 4 best guys.
Yeah, they're going to play the hits.
Yeah, that's right. Those are their 4 best guys. I wouldn't be shocked if we see all of them. The only one maybe not is Newbeck because he started last weekend, but they're going to go all out to at least win a game here and then roll the dice after that. And look, those 4 pitchers are guys, if you will say, oh, well, yeah, but okay, yeah, those guys, they've saved up all their good pitchers, but they won 3 games in conference. Fair. But also, those are 4 guys they didn't have until a month ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and they were really good.
They are not.
Yeah, they were really good in College Station.
Yeah. So, yeah, 100%. And then on the Alabama side, it's just one of those deals where, hey, look, do you want to host? Don't lose this game, because if you don't lose this game, you're toast. You're not going to host. And by just playing it, even if you win it, your RPI might take a little bit of a hit. So, so there actually are stakes in this game from the Alabama side of things.
Yeah, I would agree. And, they've already played 3 times. Missouri, you might remember, jumped out to a big lead in one of those games. It looked like that was going to be their first win, and then Alabama roared back and took over. But still, I think there'll be some confidence for Missouri, especially with how they played at A&M. They've got their guys on the mound. I think they'll come in not like your normal 3-27 team, although is there a normal 3-27 team? Anyway, they're going to come in, in a pretty good mindset against an Alabama team that really needs it. I agree. I think they need to win a couple of games, maybe 3, in order to make sure they host, depending on what else happens around the country. So I feel like that Alabama is a team, they'll have a good crowd, although, Tuesday morning at 9:30, I don't know how good it is. People do have jobs, so I'm not sure how, what that's going to look like. But there is an opportunity for them to have a home field advantage, and we'll see if that matters, right? Tyler Fay has been pretty good for them. He's been a guy who's really good maybe a couple times through the lineup, and gets in the 4th and 5th inning, and things don't, it hasn't ended gracefully for him. Sometimes it's his fault, sometimes it's not. He's had some defensive problems behind him, and then what do they do after him? I think will be interesting, because while you have to win this game in order to play tomorrow, you do need to have some pitching left for tomorrow, or for Wednesday when you play Tennessee, who's, that's a great lineup. You need to have as many bullets left as you can. So it's a nice strategy to think about as you try to advance through this single elimination tournament.
The second game of the day is going to be Kentucky and Oklahoma. That's tentatively scheduled for 1 local, 2 Eastern time. We'll see. As always, those are tentative. And Jim Dillingham has a good question that I think is kind of the jumping off point for this discussion, Mark. It says, do you think OU and Kentucky use a midweek or weekend or newbie starter tomorrow? Some say since OU is a 3 seed now, they really have nothing to gain except rest their starters for the regional. I think that's fair on the OU side. I think for OU, it's like, hey, OU to me is safe. You guys on the Nerdcast feel like that is also the case, that they're safe. So I think, Jim, you're right, where it's just like, winning tomorrow against Kentucky is maybe a little bit of found money, and then you make it to Wednesday, and then you can start to maybe piece something together for the rest of the time. On the other side, Kentucky, if they lose this game tomorrow,
it's going to be a long week.
Right. I'm not saying I'm not saying they're definitely out. I think it's probably still better than 50-50 they're in, but it is going to make for a very, very nervous week, especially as the bubble gets smaller, as stolen bids happen and what have you. And how many times have we seen it, a team with a borderline resume that just as the week goes on, the resumes tend to not age well when other teams are doing things, is I guess how I would put it. So I would expect whatever these teams do from a pitching standpoint, I think it's going to look like Kentucky is a little more desperate for it. Yeah, aggressive. Actually, yes, that's the right word, aggressive. Yeah.
I would agree. And some of the teams have announced starters and these teams have not. And maybe there's some gamesmanship going on there as you kind of see what the other guy's going to do to make your decision. I do feel like that, to your point, Kentucky needs this more than Oklahoma. And as a result, we'll see. And the other part of this is Kentucky just beat Oklahoma 3 times in Lexington, a week and a half ago. So there's fresh scouting reports. They understand what the lineups look like. They should know which pitchers are going to be, the best matchups. So that will make it interesting. It's probably that may be the most impactful game of the day. Certainly one of two. Then we'll talk about the other one in the late game. But that to me is one that Kentucky, they can put away any of the, I guess, the concern or the worry if they can just get that one more. They thought they had it against Vandy twice and got walked off on 2 ninth-inning home runs. So it's there for them. They're so close, and that's kind of been the story of their year. They're a few plays away from having this incredible season, and it seems like a lot of them are going against them. Of course, they play a lot of close games, and that's part of the deal. But I do feel like they can play with anybody, and if they get a chance into a regional, which I think they will, they'll acquit themselves well, because they've proven it that they can hang with anyone. They just, a lot of times they're just coming up maybe a run short or a play short.
Yeah, not a lot of blowouts on either side for Kentucky this season. And it is kind of amazing that, if half their 1-run losses go the other way, we'd be talking about Kentucky hosting maybe. It's just kind of amazing how that's worked. Third game of the day, South Carolina, the 15 seed against 10 seed Florida. I think on the South Carolina side, everything on the field is going to be overshadowed by the will he, won't he of Paul Mainieri. The postgame, if South Carolina, let me put it this way, when South Carolina loses, whether it's tomorrow or Wednesday or whatever, most of the discussion in the postgame press conference is going to be about Paul Mainieri's future. I can just about guarantee it, for better or worse. But then on the Florida side, they've got a lot of things going for them to where if they get to the business end of this deal, they can end up playing home games in Gainesville. Now, right now they're probably behind in the pecking order. Alabama, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Alabama, Tennessee, Ole Miss, that 16 and 14 group. But it wouldn't take a ton for Florida to get above them in the pecking order. Certainly RPI is in their favor. They are throwing Billy Barlow. South Carolina is throwing Brandon Stone, which is like the ultimate roll of the dice, because Brandon Stone has had some really poor outings, and he also had a complete game where he threw 86 pitches. So, it could really go either way. So it'll be interesting. From the Florida standpoint, it's obviously both teams have motivation because South Carolina's season ends as soon as they lose here. But I think from the Florida standpoint, when you combine, this is a talented team that is motivated to to get the advantage, especially as beat up as they are. Playing at home and getting the 1 seed is a huge advantage. To be able to play, no disrespect, like Florida A&M in your regional opener, that's just a huge thing. So I think Florida is going to come out ready to do some things.
Yeah. On the South Carolina side, they just need some positivity. I mean, they got some Thursday night when they beat LSU. That was probably one a lot of people didn't see coming. After the way they played it, against Florida and Auburn, I expected them to lose out. I did not expect them to get a win against LSU, and they did. And that was the way they were earlier in the year. They were playing everybody tough. They just weren't, kind of like what we talked about with Kentucky. They were just coming up on the losing end to a lot of them. And then it got really bad. And then you started to think, this looks like a team that doesn't want to be out there. But last week they came back and they fought and they played well, and that's what you want to see. You don't want to see that negative energy, because this is not the year that anyone expected for South Carolina. I don't know that anyone, at least we didn't expect them to challenge, for the conference title or anything, but we thought they would be better than 5 wins, 6 wins, whatever they ended up with. So I think that's the thing, is you want to have hope, and you want to see upward trending. And if you get a win on a big stage against one of the hottest teams in the country, that's something to take into the off season. From a Florida standpoint, this is one of the more fascinating teams to me. You look at if you read through their injury list, I mean, you better get comfortable, because you're going to be there a while before you get to the end of it. And a lot of guys out for the year, and during the year they've had a lot of guys miss and have come back, or they tried to come back and then missed again. And it's just been a really odd year. You usually don't have that many hit one team, and that's what Florida has. And despite all that, I mean, they lost their best hitter, Luke Heyman, this weekend. They continue to suffer injuries, and they still find ways to win. And that's, I mean, one, Kevin O'Sullivan is a freaking wizard, man. I mean, he hadn't won all these games by accident. He knows how to get the most out of his team. I think the other part of this is that because they've played so well, they've won their last 6 SEC series. I mean, who's playing better than them right now? I know the first part of the year happened, and that has to be counted against them. But if you're looking for a team, you want to take maybe a team that likely won't host and pick them to win it all, who's playing better than them right now? Now, they're not the most talented team anymore, but they're just, I don't know, they just got something about them. You go to Austin and win. You win a series from Arkansas. I mean, this is a team that's, I'm believing right now, and I certainly wouldn't have thought that, 6 weeks ago. I think the other part of this is, I would agree they are behind, the Ole Miss, Alabama, Tennessee, but they have a chance. I mean, with South Carolina, they play Ole Miss. Then you get into the weekend and you get those top 4 seeds, and do they really care about being there? And they had nothing to gain. And I think there's a path for somebody like Florida, if they have enough pitching to be able to roll through it. And it all starts with Barlow giving them a big start. He's kind of been up and down. He's had moments where he's been really good. And then what do you do, after him? How soon do you go to Clemente if you need him? I know he didn't throw Sunday, so he only threw once last weekend, which is, I think they held him a little bit just for this opportunity. And maybe he can give you an extended outing that may be the difference in the game.
Took me a minute to get to the mute button.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I was looking at another tab. I know we said we wouldn't do a lot of this, but I do think there's a fighting off a sneeze there. But I just wanted to jump in on this one. Josh Carter says, if Tennessee wins 2 games and gets to 18 wins in the top 20 RPI, it would be historic if they didn't host. Why is D1 baseball so negative and anti-Tennessee hosting chances? First of all,
6 series losses in a row, full stop.
Well, I was also just going to refute it out of hand that we are somehow have an anti-Tennessee lean here.
I mean,
but I would also
let me put it this way. Let me take this one, Joe. So if the season had been reversed, okay, and you struggled early, and then you had won, say, the last 4 series in a row, instead of losing the last 6, and you had the same resume. Otherwise, we would be talking about Tennessee as a host. So I understand your point, and I agree with that. But it's all about how it looks right now. You drop 6 in a row, and 7 out of last. What is it? Is it 5 in a row, 6 in a row, 6 out of last 7, whatever it is, right? It's just the trend lines are not where you want it to be. But is it one of the most talented teams in the country? Absolutely. Can they go on the road and win a regional? Absolutely. And honestly, with the way that the home series have gone, I think I might prefer, if I'm Tennessee, to go on the road and win a game, and try to win a series there. Certainly, they've done it in the past. Did it a couple of years ago. Went on the road to Clemson and then to Hattiesburg and ended up in Omaha. And I could see something similar for this year's Vols. Really talented team, got one of the best pitchers in the country, a really talented lineup. I just feel like this is a team that if they can kind of get it figured out, they'd be really scary.
I would also point to the Mississippi State last year. That was kind of part of why I brought it up. Is Mississippi State last year 18 league wins, right? Was it 18 or was it 17?
It was 17, and then
17.
Yeah.
RPI was 21.
In the tournament, right.
RPI was 21, 17.
Mm-hmm.
1. Yeah. So it's pretty similar. But honestly, I think it's a little bit of a moot point because I get the feeling that if Tennessee wins a couple games starting, because they don't play till Wednesday, they are hosting. I just don't think it's going to come to that.
Yeah. If they beat Alabama and then beat Texas, I think.
Yeah, I just
probably
don't think
they're probably there at that point.
Which is part of why I refuted what I was saying, is because Josh seemed to be making the argument that we're saying if they win 2 games, they still wouldn't host. I don't. No, that's why I would say I just refute that point. I don't know where we would have said that if they win 2 games, they won't host. Because I think they probably would. Anyway, I don't want to get us too bogged down on stuff like that. But Texas A&M, Mississippi State is the nightcap. 8 o'clock Central, but let's be real, probably not.
And it's supposed to rain.
That's just how it goes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, though, I will say, knock on wood, this desk is perhaps particle board or something, but knock on wood, the weather looks pretty good this week. So I think we are probably going to get a little bit lucky for the 3rd year in a row, not having like the apocalyptic
lose a day. Yeah,
right.
That's awful. Been there.
Exactly.
Got the t-shirt.
That's right. Yeah. Mississippi State A&M, obviously the table is pretty clearly set on this one. State is clearly in the field. I think they're probably too far out of the hosting discussion to really talk about it unless they win the thing. If they win the thing, we can have a different conversation. And then A&M, obviously they kind of have to, almost feels like they just have to win the game or win the thing full stop at this point.
Yeah, maybe. Certainly for Mississippi State, I think you're right. They're in. They can work their way to a 2 seed. They're kind of that borderline 3-2 right now. When we did the Nerdcast the other night, if they were to beat A&M, Auburn, LSU, and Arkansas in 4 straight games, I think they'd host. That's just, and that would just get them to the finals, right? I think if you do that, your RPI is going to jump up, and it's going to be some big scalps, and I think that would get you there. But that's a tall task. You're talking about doing that in 4 wins in 5 days to get to the final. The other part I'm really interested in is Mississippi State has just been a more confident looking club. They have gotten better starts, but then do you recall how during a stretch in the season, they would bring a guy out of the bullpen and it'd be a tight situation, and immediately it would just be either walks or lasers, and there'd be a snowman inning, right? It'd be a big crooked number up there, and the game would be over. And, knock on particle board, they really haven't had that in the last stretch, under Justin Parker. I don't know, if that's coincidence or what, but they've avoided that big letdown. And on the flip side, offensively, they're hitting the ball out of the park. And I really feel like Mississippi State is one of those teams that if they hit home runs, they win games. And that it may seem, oh, duh, right? But I think there's certain teams that really need to hit home runs to score, and that's one of them. For A&M, I think that it's going to be fascinating to see what how that works. I mean, Weston Moss is going to start. He's a really talented pitcher. One of probably their best arm, certainly out of the bullpen. And we'll see what he can give you. I think he started one game all year. That was in midweek. A&M has used the same three starters all year. One of the few teams to do that. Ole Miss is another. I do think that with A&M, I think getting off to a good start for them is really important. You don't want this whole lethargy that set in, after the Missouri deal to fester, and they need some positivity. They won't have Caden Sorrell. It's a lineup that's still talented, but do they have enough in them? Because to your point, they got to win several games just to get to the bubble, not necessarily to get in. And then they got to hope for some luck around the country. I do think if they got to the weekend, that would mean they won 3 games, that their collection of wins, I'm meaning getting to Saturday, their collection of wins would dwarf what other bubble teams have. Now they also have some negatives as well that would work against them. And then it would be up to the committee, right? It's that whole best versus most deserving argument that we have every year. And they would at least be in the discussion, where right now, they can't even see it. So I do think this is another fascinating game. One, you have Mississippi State, who can play their way, and improve their status. And I think that's a team that just wants to keep playing because everything is so well and they're having fun right now. With A&M, they're not having much fun at all. They need to find a way to have some, and they could get it started tomorrow night.
So that moves us to kind of the second round, that the games or the teams that'll start play on Wednesday. So I figured let's just talk about those 4 teams. Let's go one by one on them. Let's kind of talk about the things that seem important for those teams to be able to make a deep run here. And we'll start at the top of the bracket with Tennessee. That's the team that's going to take on the winner of Alabama, Missouri. We presume Alabama, but who knows? Stranger things have happened, such as Missouri sweeping Texas A&M in College Station. So Alabama's obviously, if it is Alabama, that's kind of Alabama's ticket to host, right? If you beat Tennessee,
that would help.
That could potentially be a trump card when you're compared to Tennessee. Now the flip side is also true, right? Where if you're Tennessee and you beat Alabama, it's going to be, obviously Alabama's going to have a hard time being placed over top of you in the pecking order. Also, just by virtue of playing, like I said, like Alabama's RPI is kind of a trump card right now, but that might not exist after they play Missouri, even just playing the game. So I'll just say quickly for Tennessee that the lineup is dangerous. We know that the starting pitching, I think, has been as good as you could ask for, right? I mean, that we could nitpick here and talk about Marcus Phillips, base runners, yada yada yada, but ultimately, like from the pitching side, they've been just fine in the rotation. For me, it's limiting bullpen exposure for Tennessee. Like, you don't want to see Nate Snead in a 4-inning type of deal early in this thing, because they're just short on guys they seem to trust other than Nate Snead. They give him all kinds of leash and put him in all kinds of situations, but Tennessee has these games, and they were in some last weekend against Arkansas, where once they start going to the bullpen, they're just like stuck in this, like every 2 outs, there's somebody else coming in because they just can't. I mean, they like to play matchups, but also it just feels like they can't get anyone to consistently like give them longer outings. And so I think it's just, look, if you can find a way to save your bullets in the bullpen until the business end of this deal, I think that's the biggest single factor for Tennessee, because I think the offense will be there. And as long as their top starters get an opportunity to take the mound later in the week, I think they'll be fine. But it's, what does the bullpen do leading up to that point, I think.
Yeah. And I would assume it'll be Phillips. He threw Thursday. They'll be coming back on Wednesday. I would think he would be the starter in their first game on Wednesday. And that'll be fascinating to see what that looks like, as he continues to evolve. Really new to baseball, really new to pitching. He's a guy who's continuing to ascend. He's a different pitcher than he was a year ago. He's kind of a come in and throw hard bullpen guy. And he's just grown leaps and bounds. He just needs to pitch and continues to get better. And I think with that lineup, that that's fascinating to me just to see. You've got all those guys that can hit the ball out of the park. Hoover's a bigger park. Now, certainly they've got enough power to hit it out anywhere, but a lot of home runs, in other ballparks are not homers in Hoover. They're run down on the wall. So that's another, interesting caveat to this. One more thing I thought about on the whole hosting thing with Tennessee. If they're being compared to Ole Miss and Alabama, those are two teams they went to those venues and won series against. Okay. The other team we brought up was Florida, a team that Tennessee swept the first weekend of conference play. So those series, which happened relatively early in the year, at least for two of them, would give Tennessee an advantage if you can just have something positive, some momentum to get behind, right? And I think that should be the goal, to not only to impress the committee, where you hopefully can host, but I think more importantly, you just want to feel good heading into postseason and kind of get that swagger back, because I like the idea. Yeah, granted, it's a great home venue, great atmosphere, all those things top notch. Nothing negative there. But I like the idea of Tennessee playing the us against the world card and going in, and they disrespected us. And I think they can come in with a little bit of a chip. And I think that's a program where that works for. At least it has in the past. And that, to me, that's kind of spicy. I think that may be you want to host, but if you don't, that's a pretty nice consolation prize because you get to play that card.
Yeah, and nobody in to see like that chip, and when they have something to kind of to push against, right? So I think you're right on about that. Let's move on to Georgia, which will take on the winner of Kentucky and Oklahoma. And I mean, I don't mean to oversimplify it, Mark, but like, is it just like if Georgia's offense travels to Hoover, metaphorically speaking, they'll probably be all right, but if it doesn't, it'll be rough because that really, I mean, at the risk of oversimplifying it, that is how their season has gone.
Yeah. That and just staying healthy. I mean, they've had some key guys out, and hopefully they'll be back full speed. And this is a time to maybe guys that may be a little rusty because they missed some time, that you can get them some live ABs and game situations. And I think the other thing for Georgia is trying to figure out your pitching. Other than Curley and Finley, what does that look like, right? What else, or what roles are people going to fill? Because honestly, I don't think Georgia can help or hurt their cause this week. I mean, they're the number one RPI. I think they're going to be a top 8 regardless. But what you want to do is come out of this, learning something about your team that can help you next week. Whether that's you got some guys some work, or you got people in different roles, and you were able to evaluate them. I think that's really, that may not sound too exciting, but to a coaching staff, it's an opportunity to get some live reps and it not be the end of the world if they don't go well.
No, I think that's right. I mean, Georgia's going to be such an interesting test case. Let's assume their RPI is 1 or 2 on Selection Monday. Like, it's just so rare that the number 1 or 2 RPI team is not in the mix to be the number 1 overall seed. Maybe Georgia gets there, right? If they get to the final weekend, whatever. But as of right now,
it's there.
But as of right now, not really,
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I would argue that, does it matter if you're the 1 seed or the 8 seed, as long as you get, I mean, it's just which bracket are you in Omaha, right? That's the only advantage of being, a 1 versus a 6 or a 3 or what have you. You get to play at home. And so I feel like, once you're in that top 8 securely, which, I kind of feel like they are, the hay's in the barn at that point. You can head to the house.
The next up is Ole Miss. They will take on the winner of Georgia and South Carolina. I got to admit, Mark, this team is probably the one that most vexes me in the SEC, because maybe I've just watched them when they've had tough weekends more often than I've seen them when they've played really well. Because I continue to kind of struggle to project them alongside, really even alongside the teams they have similar records to, like, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, like that whole group of teams. Like I consistently kind of put them towards the bottom of those groupings. And yet for the most part, they've been right there all season, right? They've actually been pretty consistent this season. Like yes, they take some lumps, but they almost always bounce back. They're one of the few teams that really hasn't had like a ridiculous winning streak or a ridiculous cold streak, right? Yeah. So maybe you can enlighten a little bit better than I can about what it would look like if Ole Miss, gets to the weekend of this thing.
Well, it means they hit a lot of home runs, because they're certainly going up there, with.
They're getting their hacks in.
They are. They do not get cheated at the dish. I feel like the other part of this is that it's a pitching staff that has rode the same three starters all year, and to avoid injury, and then two, to be productive in those roles, really gives you that consistency. And that's what, that's just what you were lauding about how consistent they've been. And I think that's a big part of it. And it's going to start. I don't know if Hunter Elliott will throw the first game or not, probably. And that would be a really nice matchup, especially, with Florida, and you put he and Peterson that'd be a pretty nice pitching duo for Wednesday. But I do feel like Ole Miss is a team that certainly I didn't expect them to win the Auburn series, even in Oxford. Auburn was just playing so well. They were scoring double-digit runs on everybody, and I thought that would continue. And they would win some shootouts against Ole Miss, and Ole Miss said no. And even the game that the Rebels lost, they had a 5-run lead, and Auburn, stormed back and ended up winning. But I feel like this is a team. They're older. They compete really well, and I feel like they're getting, that coaching staff's getting the most out of those players. And those are the kinds of teams in postseason that seem to thrive, man. They just understand how to win, how to get it done. And so that's the team, and they've got a chance to host, win a couple games. They have a great case. Even if they don't host, that's a team that's going to show up in somebody's regional with a chance to take home a trophy.
Yeah, agreed. Similarly, I think, with our next team, Auburn, who will take on the winner of Texas A&M and Mississippi State, I think they're kind of a little bit, as A&M tries to navigate through this thing. Like I think Auburn, let's just say that A&M wins. We don't know that's going to happen, but State has less on the line here. If A&M advances to take on Auburn, I feel like that's a little bit of a nightmare, just because Auburn has also been really consistent.
Yeah. And
I think you could point to the Auburn's young players and say, could that be a little bit of a hindrance? But honestly, I think their young players have been so good this year, whether you're talking about the position players or Chatterton or even Andres Alvarez at times. Like, if they were going to have slip-ups because the moment is too big for them, they probably would have already happened. And now I think we're at a point where maybe the youth is working in their favor, because they're just kind of don't know that you're supposed to get tight at this time of year.
Maybe.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, who knows?
Well, they played so much baseball by this point. I mean, they threw them in the fire right away. So they've got more at bats than a lot of older players, and certainly more innings than a lot of older players who just hadn't been in the lineup every day. So I agree. I think Auburn is a team that, depending on the draw, they could certainly end up at Omaha. I feel like that they've got a chance. For me, their resume is a little more polarizing than some of the other ones, because the conference record isn't as gaudy, but the strength of schedule within the conference was number one. It was very challenging. And I feel like if the committee recognizes that, then they're probably going to be a top 8. However, if someone else comes in the mix, and then you're trying to find one of these 6 SEC teams to bump out of the top 8, Auburn might be a candidate, right? So there is something to play for just to secure your spot for the Tigers. But they're going to host regardless. And I feel like this is a team, again, with those young players getting a chance to play on the stage in Hoover. They'll probably have a good crowd, good atmosphere. Just to experience that's only going to help them as they go forward.
Yeah, you kind of walked us to the doorstep of it, but Josh Carter asked about Auburn as a top 8, whether a lock or not or anything like that. And I think not a lock, but I think it's less because of anything they will or won't do, and more just that if Florida State wins the ACC tournament or Oregon State goes undefeated in the Big Ten tournament, and they, their record is going to, if they do that, their record is going to be super gaudy. And so I think it'd be less to have to do with Auburn if they end up the 9 or the 10 or whatever, and just more with sometimes you just get jumped because
you get squeezed out. There's only so many spots, right?
Right.
But and that's where winning that extra game or 2 games can just eliminate that possibility. And I really think that Auburn is the kind of team, because they're balanced, they have a potent offense, and their pitching has been much better than we anticipated. It's so much better than last year. And big ballpark, this is I kind of like Auburn, to have some success at the Met. I feel like they've got enough double hitters and gap hitters and things like that. Yeah, they can hit the ball out of the park, but they're really versatile and they can run a little bit. So I do think that the ballpark effect works in their favor.
All right, so that leaves us the top 4 finishers. I would say, and you correct me if I say something here, Mark, that is incorrect, but so we're talking Texas, the number 1 overall seed. They're in the Tennessee, Bama group there, theoretically Missouri. We got number 2 Arkansas. They're in the Ole Miss, Florida, South Carolina group. Number 3 LSU, Auburn, Mississippi State, Texas A&M potential opponents. Vanderbilt, the number 4, Georgia, Kentucky, Oklahoma potential opponents. It seems like those teams are more or less kind of locked into what they are, right? I mean, could there be some, competition for the number 1 overall seed, perhaps? But to your point, like, all that matters for is just which side of the bracket you're on in Omaha. So let's think about these top 4. Let's talk about these top 4 teams as kind of as a group here, Mark. And who stands out if you had to guess, just based on, whatever you want to base it on? Of these 4 teams, do you have a feel for which one is going to come in with the most willingness to really push the pedal to the floor to try to win the trophy at the end of this thing?
Vanderbilt. Tim Corbin, his teams always play well in Hoover. They all, even whether they're having a down year for them or are one of the best in the conference, they just seem to flourish in this environment. And I feel like that with the pitching that they have, the way the offense has improved, they're playing well down the stretch. I do feel like if I had to pick a winner, they'd probably be my pick right now, just playing the odds, because they've got to win fewer games than some of the other teams that may need to win. I really like that rotation. They've got guys in the bullpen they can go to. They would only have to play 3 games. I feel like Vanderbilt is a team that one that they haven't been at the quote top of the polls all year, so that maybe they're a little hungrier and got to prove themselves a little more than some of the others who've been kind of getting their roses all year. I do feel like that Vandy is a team I could see doing really well this week.
Yeah, and they're really kind of the only program well, I shouldn't say only, but they're the program that I have most often heard in post games and it just whenever they talk about it, that gives voice to, we want to win here. And Tim Corbin points to that being a turning point for his program when they were trying to get this thing rolling early on. Was the SEC tournament kind of unlocked some things for them. So I would tend to agree with you. So let's spin it this way when we talk about the top 4. Of those top 4 teams, and I'll answer this one first so that you can give it some thought. But who do you think is best equipped to win this thing? And of the top 4, And
Mm-hmm.
and this is who I picked in D1 baseballs. We do a pick your tournament winners or whatever. And I went Arkansas because I just think you have to have balance. And when they're swinging it well, they're the best lineup in the conference. Um, you know, I think they have the best pitching and they have the depth too. It's not just the quality, they
Mm-hmm.
have the depth. Texas has the quality, not necessarily the depth, right? So like that's the difference there. And Vanderbilt has the depth, but they don't have someone on the level of Cade Anderson at in front of the rotation, for example. So balance, that's who I picked.
Yeah.
I just think that, when you look at their pitching staff, I mean, even having a guy like, when you're really having to scrounge in like your fourth game of this thing, and like the fact that they can roll Will McIntyre out there just
Mm-hmm.
for example, like as much as you might kind of just be like, it's Will McIntyre. Well, that's a heck of a lot better than what a lot of teams are rolling out there
Yeah.
on day 4 or 5 of this thing, which they won't have day 5 because they don't start till later. But you know what I mean. So
Mm-hmm.
my pick was Arkansas, but man, given what this season was in the SEC, who knows?
Yeah.
Like as I've been saying all season, nothing matters week to week.
Yeah.
Every week seems to be just totally new and disconnected from anything that happened before it. So anyway, but who do you feel like is most equipped here?
Yeah, I like the Arkansas pick out of the other bracket. I like that they can mix and match with different guys, and because I don't think they're going to overextend anyone. So you've got so much depth to go through. Hey, you got 50 pitches, you got 30 pitches, you got 20, and they won't run out because they've got so many to pick from. And then the offense, I mean, the lineup's been arguably the best in the country. Certainly didn't take long to call roll. I feel like they're gonna score some runs, and I do feel like this is a team that's been on a mission all year. Been a really good team that's missed out on Omaha, and there's so much going to be riding on that home postseason the next 2 weeks, and you really want to go in. That Tennessee series I felt like was really big. Getting that win last weekend, it was great atmosphere. Two big behemoths tangling, and they were able to get the rubber game. And I feel like continuing that momentum so that everything is still positive. Even if you get to Sunday and don't win, I think that's a win, and sets up Arkansas for the postseason run that we all expect.
Yeah, ultimately any of those top 4, I think, no surprise if any of those 4 ends up being the one that lifts the trophy in the end. And of course, the advantage of the double bye. One of the things we talked about it up top, but for those who are maybe just joining us late here, like one of the things I really like about this new format is, if you're one of these 4 teams, you can treat those 3 games like a weekend. You don't have to do anything crazy with your pitching. You don't have to, you don't have to look around and try to find a guy who hasn't pitched since March that you're going to throw in there in a big game. Like these guys can just treat it kind of normally, and that sets them up for success not only this week but also moving into the following week. Because gone is to the point of Scalise makes here of like, I tried to pull his comment up. There it is. Worrying about wearing arms out ahead of regionals, like that's just not as much of a concern this year, at least with those top 4 seeds, right? Like,
and that was a draw for this format for the coaches, because there were some coaches that wanted it and some that didn't. But I think all of them understood that if you're one of those top 4 teams getting the double byes, you don't want to play a whole bunch of games, right? I mean, you'd like to win the trophy, but if you only got to play 3 games to do it, and you're rewarding the regular season, which I think we can all agree is typically a good thing. And then even the teams that are only playing the 1 extra game, that still get the bye, the 5 through 8, you're only playing 4 there, and you may not get there. What you don't want is to have to play a whole bunch of games, and then you don't even make it, to the finals, and then you're worn out and you got nothing to show for it. And I think that the only time you want to play those extra games is if you need wins in order to get in. And in this case, not only are those teams going to get the opportunity to win, but they're only going to pick up 1 loss, which, in the other, the old format, you could get saddled with 2, or you would be saddled with 2 typically. And that could actually hurt you as opposed to helping you this week.
Yeah, no, yeah, such a good point. There was nothing worse in the old format, I think, than being a team that was solidly into the field and couldn't really help itself, winning on day one and then losing on day two.
Right.
Because then it was like, well, what
1
was
and
that
2.
for? Yeah.
Yeah.
What did we bother with? Anyway. All right. Let's get out of here. Let's let the people go enjoy the rest of their Monday evenings. Mark and I will have wall-to-wall coverage this week. We'll both be be in Hoover this week. Jack DeLongshaw is making a cameo in Hoover this week, so he'll have video content as well. Mark and I will be on the written side of it. The Field of 64 updates will be coming hard and fast. No Nerdcast until
Sunday
Selection Eve, but there will be new fields every day? Question mark.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, well, as soon as enough changes to produce a new field.
Fair enough.
Maybe Tuesday won't be enough. We'll see.
Yeah,
Maybe there will be, but certainly Wednesday night we'll evaluate it and see where we are.
So new fields throughout the week. Mark and I will have stories all week. We're not necessarily doing game stories of every game, but we'll have multiple stories every day, I'm sure. Coming out of Hoover. I'm also doing a little side trip to the Sun Belt Conference. Mark and I are planning on stopping by the SWAC tournament this week on one of the days when the SEC doesn't have early games and the SWAC does. We're going over to Rickwood Field, mostly because selfishly, I've never seen a game at Rickwood Field and I would like to. So we're doing a little excursion. Anyway, so plenty of stuff coming this week in addition to we got D1 baseball has people all over the place. So plenty of conference tournament stuff to be found. So, all right, folks, enjoy the baseball this week. Thank you to our sponsors, Academy Sports and Outdoors and Tecovas Boots. Thank you, Mark, as always, for joining me. Thank you, the listeners, for listening. And we'll talk to you soon.